the Agriculture Minister and assurances that he's giving to farmers. Now, the Agri Minister has invited protesting farmers once again for a fifth round of discussions when the fourth round of talks with the farmer failed on 18th of February. Farmers resumed their march to Delhi today. The tensions are high at the Punjab-Haryana border as farmers persist on their march to Delhi. Farmers have brought in JCBs to break through barricades. They are also moving in with tractors and kites to tackle drones. Heavy traffic is reported at Delhi border due to restrictions. The traffic movement in and around Delhi NCR is slow. Remember, the government has proposed the purchase of pulses, maize and cotton crops by government agencies at MSP for the next 5 years after entering into a contract with farmers. But farmers have outrightly rejected the proposals. They are demanding higher MSP, a legal guarantee on it, a pension, debt waiver, among various other demands that farmers are making. They are currently at the border, hoping to cross that border and enter Delhi. Joining us is Shweta Saini, agriculture economist and founder, CEO, Arcus Policy Research. Shweta, good to have you on the show. We've been hoping to get you for a while now. Let's quickly, understand what farmers are asking and how much of it is feasible to give into. Now, we do know from what we've seen so far, farmers are unrelenting. They don't want MSP on just 5 crops. They want MSP on all 23 crops. From an economic point of view, does it make any sense?
Perfect. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. Before I answer your question, I need to put something that I'll put it out from our recent work on development paradox. It's a paradox that says when we study the level of support that farmers around the world get, and we look at country specific, and we find that there are richer nations who are giving more support to their farmers, and then there are poorer nations, relatively poorer nations, who are giving lower support to their farming community. Now, this is absolutely a paradox because the richer nations have a smaller percentage of their workforce employed in agriculture, whereas the poorer nations have greater. And India is among the latter part, where as a study over last 20 years, we found that the farmers have been relatively net taxed and net not supported. So one thing is straight, that the farmers have had to bear the burden of high inflation, food inflation, and therefore they've actually been on the front of facing the brunt. Now, coming to the demands of what you're saying, of course, the demands, particularly for MSP plus 50%, does not make sense. I mean, particularly so because we see that there are a lot of commodities. For example, mustard in today's case. We take the example of a crop when the MSPs are increased without aligning with the demand and supply situation, you alienate the value chain. And in which case, Maharashtra did this experiment in 2018, where then CM Fadnavis ji had ensured that no buying of soybean, for example, will be below MSP. Traders boycotted the market and the order had to be withdrawn. So one, you cannot alienate the market. The government cannot be the buyer of the last resort. The government has to ensure that the private sector buys, but yes, giving remunerative returns to farmers is important. What has happened yesterday was that they've actually alienated crop diversification from MSPs, which I think is not desired. But of course, I can take more questions and then expand.
Absolutely. So coming to that next big question, of course, is, what about crop diversification? Because farmers and people we've spoken to so far, including economists such as yourself, some of them suggested if you ensure an MSP and a guarantee on MSP, not for 23 crops, but all crops, all 200 crops, that will in fact ensure that farmers diversify their crop cultivation. Do you agree with that assessment? And if not, what is the alternate way to diversify crops in this country? Because we've been suffering from the same set of crops being sown on the same sort of soil that it does not support.
I would say that now let's just look at the example of pulses and oilseeds at the moment. we've had good aggressive increases in pulses MSPs, but we've also had open import policy of pulses. That was because the inflation domestically was so high that they had to sign MOUs globally. We had to open up, reduce the duties. Now, what has happened is, even though if the government's taken out an MSP, the policies of the government are such that the landed price of imported goods are lower than the MSP. So, what I believe is that MSP increment has to align with the bigger picture of what crops do you wish to focus going forward. And second, the government policies themselves cannot be different from what so if you're hoping to focus on pulses, then you have to ensure that via your trade policies, your stocking policies, you're not strangulating a market. So you will not be importing cheap chana from Australia, for example, that lands much below the MSP. So what is the point? So I feel that MSPs, one, have to align with a bigger picture of the crop diversification drive, wherein the focus has to be on oilseeds and pulses, also because the import dependency has gone up in the recent years. And second, your own policies of the government have to align. The two hands have to move together. And that's what I think.
Okay.
Right. I just have a simple question to ask over here. Pardon me for my simplicity over here. The farmers are now asking for the so-called MS Swaminathan formula of C2 plus 50%. But it was the MS Swaminathan committee recommendations that spoke about how, when it comes to cultivation and making agriculture adequately remunerative in this country, we're far, far away. Not the right crops are cultivated on the right soil in the right conditions. Mostly it's farmers going for the easiest cash crops possible. So you need to sort of redraw the map of agriculture in this country, and that fundamentally would change the way agriculture is conducted in this country, and then you wouldn't have farmers suffering, and then you would not have any doubts about whether we make enough we produce enough food for our own population.
And just to add to that, I read a very interesting piece somewhere, and it said exactly what Krishna said. It said that perhaps there was no economist present in the Swaminathan Commission, and hence the recommendations, because they don't they don't support the market, they don't support the kind of margins we've seen in any industry at all, anywhere.
100%. I mean, there are two aspects to what is being talked about here. First, the fact that your macro policies have to align with your MSP. Now, if you continue to distribute 60 million tons of rice and wheat every year to 813 million people, you cannot have states like Punjab and Haryana diversify away from rice. So particularly so in an El Nino year or a drought year, where else will you go and actually procure? So unless there is a bigger change of what crops do we have to focus on for nutritional purposes, for welfare purposes, no change in silo can actually deliver crop diversification. That's first. Second, absolutely correct that no industry, now we need to understand, and of course it's already been talked about a lot, and I recently heard Professor Chand also explain it so well, that comprehensive cost of cultivation, of course, has a paid out cost element to it, but it has three more aspects which has an imputed value. So the labor of the farmer, the capital, and the land. The three are the imputed costs which get added to A2 cost, which is the paid out cost, to create a C2. Now, what Swaminathan ji had said was, you give a 50% return on each of these four components. That means even on the capital that I've employed, I'm seeking a 50% return. I mean, of course, you very correctly said there was no economist, and I think Professor Swaminathan's objective was, he was more geared towards doubling farmers' income. But I sense that this demand itself is not really feasible fiscally. Okay. However, what is low-hanging and feasible is that whatever MSP you deliver, your policies should ensure that at least nothing disrupts that MSP. Of course, there will be market dynamics which will pull it down, pull it up. We see what is happening in pulses, but we also see what is happening in mustard and is likely to happen in the coming months, and how prices are below MSP. So you have to let the market be, but ensuring remuneration for the farmers is critical. because you may
You know,
drive them to
I want to
produce
come to
maize
that,
once.
Shweta, and since we are running out of time, I think you put out a very interesting point. We must support farmers. We're not very far away from reality, and reality is farmers need greater support. It's not a very lucrative business to be in. Many farmers say, give us other jobs, we will happily switch. We don't have an alternative. So I'm not going to sit here rich and fine in my own studio in national capital and believe that farmers are out on streets for some joy. They are painstakingly out on streets. They are demanding what they believe is good for them. May not be good for their livelihood, but is actually good for them right now. What, according to you, Shweta, as an economist, will be a way out of this deadlock? How can we clear this deadlock? How can we ensure greater support to farmers while also ensuring greater crop diversification and not letting go of that substantial sum to pay up as MSP? So without that legal guarantee of MSP, what is the way out?
So, I am actually splitting the scenario under three objectives. If my first objective is crop diversification, the second objective is to ensure remunerative incomes irrespective of which crop to the farmers. And third is a welfare component, which has also been talked about, where pensions are being talked about, and there are other debt loan waivers which are being talked about. So, these are three different things. So a price tool like an MSP cannot deliver income support. So a price tool has to be ideally used for crop diversification, but for everything else, a basic income approach is what I've always been writing about, and that's what we suggest. It's administratively easy to deliver. It can be pegged to different aspects of lifestyle of a household in that area, and therefore, what I sense is that even if you were to give it on one crop, you cannot give it on livestock, you cannot give it on other activities in the right sector. Therefore, to only give it for crops and not give it for others will be an unfair thing. But what I think what is administratively easy and can be maintained is a basic income approach, wherein we can think of PM Kisan entitlement probably going up, or we can think of another research that we've been doing is a basic living income approach, wherein we try and benchmark what average household in the area should be able to earn. We give them a gap. So
Okay.
administratively, and be able to target the right vulnerable people and be able to support them in the right way. I don't think MSP can be that income tool. It has to be an income approach.